Hello there. I just came back from a debate between the 2019 candidates to be the next European Commission President. In EU lingo, these people are referred to as the Spitzenkandidaten, which is the German word for lead candidates. As you may know if you're a European voter, although sadly very few do, the national parties of the various European member states sit in party groups in the European Parliament. There is a group, the EPP, the European People's Party, for the moderate pro-European conservatives, for example, Angela Merkel's Christian Democratic Union. There is a party, the Socialists and Democrats, for the moderate pro-European socialists. They, for example, are the UK Labour Party, the French Democratic Socialist Party, the Dutch PvdA. There's a party between them for the Liberals that represent both classic Liberals towards the right and progressive Liberals towards the left. There's an environmentalist party, there's a more hard left party, there's a more anti-European Conservative Party spearheaded by the UK Conservatives. And then everything further to the right of them is a bit of a mess right now, but more or less you have Salvini's New Alliance, and then Nigel Farage is probably going to do a thing, I guess. Anyway, these parties can put forward the people that they want to be the next Commission President of the European Commission, right? So the 5 candidates who were at this debate were A. Franz Timmermans of the Socialists and Democrats, so that's the moderate pro-European socialists. B. Guy Verhofstadt of the Liberal group, of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe. Then there was, I'm going to get these names wrong, which I have them here, Bas Eickhout, who is is one of the 2 candidates of the Green group, the European Green Party. They've actually put forward 2 candidates, one man and one woman, so he's the man, he's the one who went to that debate, and I believe the other candidate, whose name is Ska Keller, will be the other 2 Spitzenkandidaten debates. Then there was the hard left, the European left. They put forward also 2 candidates, one man, one woman, and they sent their female candidate, Violetta Tomic, to the debate. And then finally, the 5th person in the debate was the candidate for the European Conservatives and Reformists, whose name is Jean Zandriel, I want to say. I'm going to mispronounce all of those names continuously and more or less try to avoid saying them as much as I can. Sadly, the European People's Party, who are likely going to be able to pick the next Commission President, or at least have more influence in it than most parties, given they will probably win the election and be the largest party, they did not send their candidate, a guy called Manfred Weber, to the debates. I assume he's doing a similar thing to what Theresa May did in the UK general election she's just gone, in which she, knowing she'd likely win, but knowing also she wasn't a very good debater, tried to avoid debates at all costs. I assume that Manfred Weber is doing a very similar thing. And then also the far-right parties, they haven't really put forward any Spitzenkandidaten. I mean, when your whole shtick is that the EU shouldn't exist, it's quite hard to put forward something that you think should be running it. But anyway, I've just come back from that debate. It was quite interesting. I wasn't actually inside the debate. Tickets were sold out so damn quickly that I couldn't get them, but in the Vleithof, just outside of the venue, they hosted a sort of viewing party. There were, hundreds of people outside looking at this big screen, so that was a fun thing to do. And I wanted to share some of my thoughts, having just got back, because I mean, this is so parochial. I assume no one else is making anything about this topic. Sorry EU, I love you, but no one cares about you. So there were a few things I thought were quite interesting about this debate. One was a game that was being played between Eickhout, the Green Party candidate, and Timmermans, the Socialist candidate. They're both from the Netherlands, so they had their home crowd they were appealing to, and indeed there was a website you could vote on to vote for who you thought would win the debate during the debates. And Timmermans won that, followed by Eickhout, I assume because of their nationality. Most of the people who were voting were the people who were actually at the debates, and they're disproportionately Dutch, so I assume they voted for the Dutch candidates, even though in reality Timmermans is not going to win, although the person who is going to win, Weber, wasn't at the debate, so fair enough. And then the Greens are going to get nowhere near second place. But yeah, there was an interesting game that Timmermans and Eickhout, the socialist, and the Green candidate were playing, in which Timmermans was doing everything he could to associate himself with the Greens and with the European left. Meanwhile, Eickhout was doing everything that he could to do the opposite, to disassociate himself with the sort of mainstream establishment parties, which there I think he mostly saw as the socialists, so Timmermans, and the Liberals, Verhofstadt. The European Conservatives and Reformists were the only properly right-wing party at the debates, so they weren't really trying to appeal to the same voters. Whereas the Socialists, the Greens, and the Liberals, to at least some extent, do compete for voters. And there was this interesting game going on. At every opportunity, Buzz Eickhout attacked the Liberals, and to a lesser extent the Socialists, for not putting their money where their mouth is. There was an exchange, I believe, where Verhofstadt mentioned that he did not want the EU to be pursuing trade deals with countries that were not part of the Paris Climate Agreement, to which Eickhout immediately responded, well then, why were you pushing for a trade deal with the USA, given that Donald Trump pulled them out of the Paris Climate Agreement? And there was a similar exchange on, I want to say, taxation or minimum wage or something along those lines, where Eickhout was immediately on the, you're saying all this, but actually, you know, we're the true candidates for whatever you're saying, and you're all talk and no action. And Timmermans was doing the exact opposite thing, where he was trying to associate himself very much with the European left, the hard left, and with the Greens, saying, we three, the Socialists, the Greens, and the European left, are the Green Party. You should vote for us. He very much situated himself as part of a progressive grouping that very explicitly excluded the Liberals. And here I think Timmermans is trying to reverse what has been more or less the, shall we say, hard truth of the socialists recently, where most socialist parties, most moderate socialist parties in Europe, have become to be seen as a doormat for the right, as parties who aren't doing what they say they should be doing. And so in a lot of European countries, these traditional centre-left parties are being abandoned in droves for green parties, for parties further left, and even to some extent for progressive liberal parties. For example, in the Netherlands, the PvdA, the traditional socialist party, have had their support base collapse, and the big victors from that have been Democratische Rechtsrecht, the progressive liberal party, and GroenLinks, the environmentalist party. So Timmermans is very explicitly trying to say, no, we're not that. We are putting our money where our mouth is. We are, progressive and green and truly left-wing. But the Liberals are the establishment party. You should be distrusting them. We are part of this progressive alliance. Whereas Eickhout, doing the exact opposite thing, was trying to undermine that and say, no, the Liberals and the Socialists, they actually aren't doing what they say they want to do. And for that reason, I think Buzz Eickhout probably won the debate overall in terms of who was, just from an objective standpoint, the most convincing speaker. He was very clear, and he knew what differentiated him from the other candidates, rhetorical or otherwise. He was always on this idea of, no, here's how we're different. Here's how you've said this thing but not done it, and we are going to do the thing. Right? Whereas if you were to listen to Verhofstadt and Timmermans, and Buzz, without him making those clarifications, you would be forgiven for thinking that they were representing more or less the same party. And indeed, politically, these parties don't disagree on all that much. The Liberals, the environmentalists, and the Socialists, assuming that by liberal we mean progressive liberal, which we don't always when it comes to Europe, but Verhofstadt certainly would fit into that category, and assuming that by socialist we mean social democrat, then actually the difference between social democracy, environmentalism, and progressive liberalism as political movements is more or less emphasised, with liberals emphasising civil rights and freedom, social democrats emphasising social justice, and environmentalists emphasising the environment, rather than any true fundamental disagreement. I thought it was really interesting how the candidates, Timmermans and Eickhout, really tried to battle over these values that they very much do share. They just disagree mostly on emphasis, in my opinion, and really try to differentiate them from each other. Verhofstadt, I don't think, was playing that game. He did frequently defend the liberal grouping from the attempts by Timmermans and Eickhout to distance himself from the Liberals. He defended the Liberal record on environmentalism, and he responded, I think, quite well to Eickhout's point about trade agreements. But yeah, this is a really interesting game, and something that I think is honestly perhaps the only thing the socialists can do right now. Across Europe, the traditional socialist parties have more or less been collapsing. Just yesterday or the day before, in Spain, that tradition or that trend was reversed by the PSOE, by Spain's socialists, and actually what we saw there was the Conservatives moving to the right, but still losing a lot of support to the far right and to the right-wing liberals, to Demos. But across Europe, we are seeing a more or less collapse of socialist parties and a movement of those voters towards other progressive left-wing parties. So yeah, that I think is interesting. Other than that, the only other interesting thing I can talk about, really, is how left-wing the debate seemed. There was only one right-wing party in attendance, the European Conservatives and Reformists. The European People's Party, who are most likely going to get the plurality, the largest minority of the seats, weren't there. And the far right were notably absent. Again, I've mentioned, they don't really partake in the whole Spitzenkandidaten idea, given that their arguments mostly centre around Europe doing less governing. They don't really want to appoint a person to govern Europe. And that noticeably shifted the debate. All five candidates said that they would not only support, but they take active measures to create a gender-balanced European Commission. Now, Jean-Claude Juncker, the current Commission President, also said he'd do that, and there is a bit of a problem here, where the commissioners are actually proposed by the member states, and the effect that the Commission President has is not absolute. They have to bargain with the member states, and generally speaking, the member states hold far more power. Verhofstadt made a very, very interesting point. He argued that the European Parliament should refuse to accept any commission that is not gender balanced, because once the member states appoint the commissioners and the president of the commission gives them their roles, it's up to the parliament to either accept or reject the commission, and the parliament can even accept or reject individual members of the commission. So that was an interesting point, and one way in which the parliament and the people, in effect, could actually enforce a gender-balanced commission. But by and large, what I'm trying to say is, while this is a hard thing to do, with the Parliament option being quite a nuclear one, and Bas Eickhout's solution was basically just to not engage with the European Council, with the member states, unless they put forward a gender balance commission. That's also a bit of a nuclear option. So while I think these things might not actually happen in reality, it's interesting to see these policies being floated. They are quite radical, and it's interesting to see even the Conservative actually be in favour of a gender-balanced European Commission, even if he couched it in terms that you might call less than progressive. Other than that, the only notable thing from my perspective was the lack of concrete proposals. All candidates appeared to be peddling mostly values, not so much policies. There were some concrete policies. I believe the European left candidate put forward a minimum... Frans Timmermans put forward a minimum 18% corporation tax across the EU, and Timmermans, Verhofstadt, and the European left candidate all put forward some measure of common social minimum across Europe, some kind of minimum wage across of Europe. That was opposed by the Conservative candidate, but I think responded to very well by Timmermans. But yeah, by and large, concrete proposals were lacking. Towards the end, we got some concrete proposals when the candidates were explicitly asked for their boldest proposal. And off the top of my head, I believe Verhofstadt and Timmermans focused on the migration crisis and having common European rules and agencies to manage it. The European left candidate was mentioning trade agreements and keeping out products from products made by slaves or people in near slavery conditions and products that undermine consumer protections. The Green candidate predictably mentioned something environmentalist, and I cannot remember off the top of my head what the Conservative candidate put forward. But besides those concrete proposals at the end, there was very little in terms of actual policy debates, which again is one of the reasons why you could be mistaken at times for thinking that Timmermans, Eickhout and Verhofstadt were representing very similar or basically the same party, given that the actual values they were peddling were very compatible in most situations. Eickhout was of course banging on a bit more about the environment. Verhofstadt was parading around his liberal basis, and Timmermans was trying to do something else. But by and large, when they get down to values, really there was a centrist bloc of Eickhout, Verhofstadt and Timmermans. There was a noticeably more left-wing candidate, and there was a noticeably more right-wing candidate. Besides that, I don't think there's much more I can say on the debates. I will say I will be continuing to follow the Spitzenkandidaten. It's fairly clear that if the Spitzenkandidaten process works as intended, so the largest party gets to put forward their Spitzenkandidat, then it will be Manfred Weber who gets elected. But it is still interesting to see what the other parties are saying, because not only are the Spitzenkandidaten putting forward their proposals for what they would do if they were Commission President, but also they are setting the stage for what their party will do over the next 5 years in the European Parliament, what proposals they will support and not support, and what political alliances and coalitions can be formed to get through legislation, where compromises can be made and where they can't be made. There was an interesting moment toward the end when the Conservative candidate explicitly said that he would not support Timmermans just at all, given that Timmermans is probably the second most likely person to be Commission President. So, with all of that said, that's my 2 cents on some of the things I thought were most interesting about the European Spitzenkandidaten debates that just happened this evening, and have a good night. So, I guess this is where I do the YouTube stuff, or no, I can't bring myself to that. Bye!